Hello, and we're back with a new episode of Futurism. Unfortunately, Nicholas couldn't come out here today, but I'm going to be the host for today, so hopefully you guys are good with that. I actually have a pretty interesting guest from the Alt Protein Project. So, hello, Lauren. Would you like to, introduce yourself and sort of what you're doing, not only at Hopkins, but also a little bit of like what the Alt Protein Project is for all our viewers?
Hi, Ricardo. Thank you so much for the invitation. I would love to tell you about the Alt Protein Project. So, the Alt Protein Project is a group that I co-founded along with Mackenzie Simon Collins. She's currently an undergrad in public health.
Mhm.
I'm a biophysics graduate student here, a PhD student at the Johns Hopkins School of Medicine. But I was teaching a class on food of the future. Um, just covering different technologies for growing like the next generation animal products.
Mhm.
And Mackenzie was in my class. And after that class ended, we decided to start a student group, Alt Protein Project. It's just one chapter of many. And this actually is an initiative out of the Good Food Institute. The Good Food Institute is a nonprofit organization that is trying to pioneer all these different future food technologies. So we're just, the Johns Hopkins Alt Protein Project chapter.
Awesome, awesome. And actually, to go along with that, so are you focused more on ideas or conversations? Is it more about like searching for new alternative proteins or potentially like converting people from, animal-based proteins to like more plant-based proteins? Like, could you tell me a little bit more about that?
Yeah, I so for the record, we are not interested in, making the whole world vegan or, turning Hopkins vegan or anything. That is not our primary focus, although our group does attract a lot of vegans.
Mm-hmm.
I'm vegan myself, and we have many vegans in the group who are passionate about this. But our group is, not necessarily to convince people to have lifestyle changes, but rather to convince people to help champion some of these technologies. So the theory of change for our Alt Protein Project and Good Food Institute is that these technologies will enable some of these consumer choices that more sustainable consumer choices. So, for example, many people had never had a veggie burger
Mm-hmm.
before Impossible Foods came around. So, Impossible Foods is one of the first really famous alt protein companies, as is Beyond Meat.
Right.
And Impossible Foods really, they had this technology platform that enabled them to have, a really meaty burger. And now tons of people have had veggie burgers, and now it's just an easier choice for them to make. So we want to enable the innovation and research uh, that helped companies like Impossible Foods to launch their product. So in the case of Impossible Foods, that's like a plant-based product. It has plant-based protein in it, but also uses fermentation-derived hemoglobin from a soy plant, actually. And then there's other technologies like cultured meat that are another pillar of this alternative protein movement.
Right. Yeah, it's funny that you mentioned the Impossible Burger because I remember hearing a lot about it like a few years ago when it was just starting to pop out, and eventually when actually funny enough, Burger King actually came up with their Impossible Whopper. I was like, oh, this is like the perfect
Yeah.
opportunity to go and like try it because it sounded like such an interesting product. I tried it out and actually, like in my opinion, it was like pretty good. Like comparing it to like a regular burger, obviously there are some differences here and there, but like overall, like the taste and everything, I think it was pretty good in my opinion. So it's kind of crazy, just like the reach that Impossible has been able to have with like a variety of their products, even going as far as like to introduce themselves into a fast food like chain market.
Yeah, that's great to hear you say that. Really encouraging. They've worked really hard to reach price parity. I think there's still a little bit of a premium on the Impossible and the Beyond Meat burgers, just compared to, the cheapest burger you can get. But
Hmm.
they've really been scaling up their technology, and they reached price parity really quickly, I'd say, at least compared to, some more higher end burgers. And it's great to hear people say, I really liked it. I could barely tell the difference. I know in some of their consumer studies, they were saying that they passed some of these blind taste tests where people could, if they were blinded, or
Hmm.
they didn't know what they were eating, they would have thought that it was meat. And I think definitely veggie burgers. I've been vegetarian since for like 20 years. I think I was 11 years old when I became vegetarian. And I grew up on Morningstar burgers and
Okay.
Boca burgers. Those do not compare at all. And so I'm just really excited to see, a huge population enjoying veggie burgers, essentially.
Yeah, for sure. And actually, going into the sort of like why the all alternate protein project. So like, how and what you said that like a chapter here at Hopkins, right? But like originally, how and why was it created? Like, what was the original statement for creating this alternative protein project?
Yeah, that's a good question. Well, okay, so it started in 2020, the Alt Protein Project as a whole. We
Hmm.
didn't join until 2021, so we were
Right.
on the second round of Alt Protein Project chapters. The first few chapters that started, there were just five in 2020. I think they were at UC Berkeley, UC Davis, Colorado Boulder, and UNC Chapel Hill, and also Tel Aviv in Israel. And the reason that these were the pilot uh, chapters, the reason that they got started is because the Good Food Institute that I mentioned earlier, so
Hmm.
they're a nonprofit and they're trying to champion these technologies of plant-based, fermentation-derived, and cultured or stem cell-derived meat products. And it's also not just meat, it's also dairy and eggs and fish and any kind of ingredient that will help make food healthier or more sustainable and not animal derived. So that nonprofit, Good Food Institute, got these five chapters to start as kind of a pilot run, and they realize that universities are an engine for innovation in in anything. So if you look at any sort of technology out there in clean tech, biotech, a lot of that research starts at the university level. And the only way that they can really, uh, the only way you can really start this research is if you learn about it. And so students are as it turns out, are very passionate, and there's a lot of leaders in student, yeah, there's a lot of leaders out there amongst students at different universities around the world who are capable of kind of galvanizing professors, grad students, undergrads, staff, and whatnot to kind of get this research started, but also get education started. So some of the first initiatives that these Alt Protein Project chapters were doing was just spreading awareness, having well, to be fair, this started in 2020, so that was
Hmm.
the pandemic. But it kind of started before, the pandemic hit. They were having tastings, they were having social meetups, and just like lectures, guest lectures, journal clubs, things like that. And once the pandemic hit, there were a lot of webinars with industry leaders in this space, and uh, courses online, and just different presentations. So we're spreading awareness, building community, building research capabilities eventually. But before you build these research capabilities, you really got to educate people. Um, yeah, so education, research, community building, awareness building, also business development. That's another one of our pillars of,
Hmm.
our strategies for sharing this technology and encouraging innovation in this space.
Interesting. So I guess to go along with that, like, what are some of your actually favorite like protein alternatives? Because I know that, depending on who you ask, like, it's very much on a case by case basis. But like, what would you say are some of your like favorite alternative protein sources that you use on a daily basis or that have worked for you?
Yeah, so alternative protein, I kind of don't like that word sometimes because alternative proteins that we talk about in the All Protein Project, it includes things like soy and
Mm-hmm.
pulses like legumes and beans and nuts and whatnot. So I that's what, I've been vegan for many years now, vegetarian for even longer, and I've always loved tempeh and tofu as well as beans and lentils. And yeah, I like all of those quote unquote alternative proteins. They were
Right.
never alternative for me. They were my primary choice. And so that's always been my favorite. I try to follow personally like a healthy vegan diet. It's really
Hmm.
easy not to do a vegan diet healthy because there's so many substitutes now, which is a great thing, and I'm really happy about it. But now I just have to be more careful. So I do usually opt for not the Impossible Burger. Maybe I'll have that once every, a couple times a year for holidays
Hmm.
or celebrations. But I usually opt for the healthy ones. But don't get me wrong, I do love the Impossible Burger on like a 4th of July weekend or something like that. So yeah, I guess I'd say I'd usually opt for the legumes and the soy products.
Yeah, I think that's really good because especially like I personally am a person who also like eats obviously like beef or like chicken and a lot of these things, but at the center of a lot of it, especially because ethnically like being Mexican, like one of the major things is beans as well. So that's always like an extra protein source that I'm constantly eating as well. So I can definitely see how like me just eating beans is not really like that much of a quote unquote like issue, right? If I'm able to get like a lot of protein from it. So I definitely see how like
Right.
it's very easy to like shift from one protein source to like another, especially like depending on like your culture, because that might be something that's already like pretty well cemented into what you're eating on like a pretty weekly basis as well.
It's interesting that you say that because that's one of the critiques of calling it alt protein. I mean, you have to call it something. I'm not
Hmm.
really sure what the best term is, but it's like, why are you? I think one of the founders of Miyoko's Creamery, they make vegan cheese, and she hates it when people call them alt protein because she's like, this is just, it's just protein. It's a cashew-based cheese. And she says so many cultures survived on these quote unquote alternative proteins for centuries. So she really doesn't like that we call it alt protein, just because it's the primary protein for so many cultures. I guess not the U.S., but other places.
Yeah, yeah, no. And it really, I think that also kind of goes to show how, in a way, we become like so cemented in the idea of just like protein really being animal based, where we sort of forget how many places of nutrition we actually get from so many other things. Specifically just like plant like vegetables, like fruits, a lot of the stuff that we need to survive and thrive, not just protein, but a lot of other macronutrients that we really need, and we sometimes just forget about it because I guess in like chicken and meat, a lot of this just seems like so much easier to obtain nowadays. So people have just kind of cemented into the everyday household or everyday thinking that these are just the only sources of protein that you can really get at.
Right. I mean, especially in the US. I think in other countries, I mean, especially like in China, tofu is a staple ingredient there. But here in the US, if you're eating tofu, they're like, oh, ew, that's for vegetarians. But you don't have to be vegetarian to eat tofu.
Right, right, right. Yeah, yeah, because I was thinking actually of an example of something that does contain a lot of protein, but I'm not exactly sure if I mean technically like it's an animal, but it's not like a big animal. So like I know a company, I don't exactly remember the name, and it's also a thing in Mexico as well. But like basically I think eating a type of insect, I don't remember if it was like crickets or something like that. So in Mexico, for example, like my mom has sort of like been around this and seen people eat it. Like she hasn't personally, but it's like very popular in like ranches or like different communities in Mexico to eat like crickets. And
Mhm.
based on even just environmental issues, if we're going along with that, like the production of meat in both like beef and chicken can be like pretty detrimental to the environment. Like there have been studies that kind of show this, and they use a lot of water. Like there's a whole bunch of different things that go into it. But like crickets, for example, in order to harvest like the same amount of protein from a crickets versus their equivalent in like chicken or beef. It requires like far less nutrients. It requires a lot less like uh, labor, and it's less harmful just on the land that these crickets are being like actually harvested in. So and actually they provide like a pretty good amount of protein as well for like their body content, which is actually pretty surprising. So would you say that like that can also potentially be one of the ways in that we can shift our focus from like more like larger animal base to something that is a little bit less, potentially harmful to the environment? Would you say like that's a good sort of point to pivot towards?
I think people should do whatever they can, whatever's in their personal willpower and in order to make differences in their diet for health reasons or sustainability reasons. So, I mean, you mentioned the insects, and I think the Good Food Institute does not necessarily promote insect agriculture as one of their pillars, but
Mm-hmm.
it is certainly a category that is being explored. And I've seen several different startups exploring this in the U.S. And the problem is, in the U.S. especially,
Right.
I'm just keep mentioning the U.S. because that's where I'm from and that's what I'm most familiar with in terms of the market and consumer behavior. But the insect agriculture usually is kind of repulsive to people here. But in other cultures, people eat insects all the time, and it's totally normal. And you're right, they do have high protein. And furthermore, not only do they have high protein, but they have actually a pretty good conversion rate in terms of how many calories they need to take in to
Mm-hmm.
convert that into protein. I don't know the numbers off of
Right.
the
Right.
top of my head, but you're right. I mean, some of these larger animals like cows, they end up being very they don't have great conversion of calories to protein or calories to final to calories even. So cows are like the least efficient in terms of, okay, if we are giving you this much water, giving you this much food over your entire lifetime, and like you don't get that many calories out
Mm-hmm.
after you slaughter the animal. Chickens are a little bit more efficient, so poultry in general is more efficient, and then fish even more efficient, and then insects even more efficient. But I'm pretty sure plants generally are the most efficient at converting, carbon sources or water or yeah, just other nutrients in the soil into final calories, which is and protein for that matter. So that's just one argument for, choosing the plant-based option because we don't always think about, okay, well, plants, you do have to grow them, but they don't take nearly as long as it takes to grow an animal to the slaughter size. Um, but yeah, I guess because you mentioned like would I recommend someone go for insects or fish or chicken instead of beef? Absolutely. If that's it'll probably be better for your health to go for these smaller organisms. And but beef is one of the worst offenders in terms of climate change impact. Or yeah, climate impact. It uses the most water, it uses the most land, it uses the most calories, and also has cows tend to have the most waste because they're so big and most carbon emissions.
Right, right. No, yeah, it totally does make sense, especially because, cows being such large animals, especially like you have to take care of a lot of them. And it's basically people don't really see this as well, but when especially you're doing a lot of farming, like especially of these large animals, you really have to take into account like every need that they may have. Like if a cow gets sick or if anything happens, like there's a lot of money that goes into it as well. So it's not only just about making sure that you get the meat out at the end of the day, but also like taking care of these animals until they get to that point, which can be pretty stressful for the people that are working on these things, like people who work in like chicken farms or just like regular farms. like it's pretty difficult as well to handle these animals. So I definitely do see a benefit from just going straight to the plant route, or just like better, more efficient, and easier to deal with animals as well. So I definitely see that point.
Yeah, you just reminded me of another key reason why we are doing this, and that's antibiotic resistance. And basically, you hit the nail on the head. These animals, they get sick all the time, especially because they're in these confined environments and they're
Hmm.
not well taken care of. They're not, if you no, don't ever go to like a factory farm, you will be so sad and so disgusted. But in order to in order to combat these potential diseases, they have to like just pump them full of antibiotics. And as it turns out, out of all the antibiotics that we have in existence, 70% of them end up being used on animals. It's like, oh, and it's also the perfect breeding ground for new novel viruses and novel viruses and bacteria to combine. Like all this what do they call it? Horizontal gene transfer can occur.
Hmm.
You put, cows and chickens and bats and all this stuff in one place, and they're getting sick. They have open wounds. Of course, you're going to get some pandemic. I mean, there's a huge concern that pandemics, like COVID-19, that was a animal that came from an animal as well, from
Hmm.
a a, a live market actually, with wild animals. But we'll probably expect to see more of that if we don't address this antibiotic abuse.
Right.
Like we're really abusing these antibiotics. And so the bacteria are getting so much better at evading and evolving to resist these antibiotics that we're giving to animals.
Yeah,
But
of
we need
course.
those ourselves.
Yeah, yeah, that's, and honestly that's also one of my concerns. Not necessarily for animals because I never really thought about it, but you're completely right. But also just on people in general and how viruses evolved.
Right.
Because comparing like a virus from 100 years ago to one now, they're way more resistant, and that's also the reason why we've seen a lot of variants to the COVID-19 virus, which initially started all this. We had like a whole bunch of major changes within the virus itself. So we got like the Delta virus, which started to make its wave, and now the new one, which is obviously like far less dangerous, but also is spreading a lot more. And that's why we've been getting these new shots. So it's actually pretty interesting that, and you're right, like a lot of these farms, a lot of these like keeping up animals do tend to increase the risk of breeding grounds for new viruses, which can, of course, like turn into other diseases or like worse pandemics perhaps than we may have seen in the past. So that's actually a pretty interesting thing. I think. Do you think then that obviously like going to other sources of protein would obviously alleviate this? What are your thoughts actually on lab grown meat? I know that like specifically like Nicholas has really sort of charged with this idea that he thinks that this is a really great technology that can be further implemented to have obviously like the benefit of having like quote unquote like animal meat while at the same time like reducing the effects that we have on the earth by actually raising a lot of these animals and having them in like very confined spaces and potentially like having a breeding grounds for like new diseases and stuff. So what are your thoughts on lab grown meat and like its development?
Yeah, I gotta say, I'm really excited about lab grown meat. I don't know that I'll eat it myself, but the product is not for me.
Hmm.
It's for people who really like meat but don't want to give it up for, sustainability concerns. So lab grown meat could be a solution so that people can have their meat and eat it too, kind of.
Right.
And and it has come a long way since I think Mark Post had the first cultured meat burger in 2013, I believe. So they've been working on this since late or yeah 2010 or so. And I think the first cultured meat burger was about $300,000. And that's not for all the R&D and the personnel and everything. That was actually how much it cost with all the growth factors and just the material that was used to make it, it was $300,000. But now it's gone down like that, I mean, 1,000 times. And I don't know exactly the price point of cultured meat right now. And it's not on, it's only being sold in Singapore as of now. That's the only place it's approved to be sold. Although
Hmm.
a lot of companies in the US are, uh, there has been a FDA green light to start with the approval process. I don't think it's officially approved yet, but it will probably see that in the next year, and then they'll start selling it. They're starting off with hybrid products mostly, so not completely cultured meat, but you can have maybe 10% cultured meat, or in some cases 75% cultured meat. I've heard different companies say different percentages that they're planning to launch with, but they're having plant protein in there still to provide some more structural integrity and just allow the cultured meat to enter the market before it's completely scaled up to the amount of meat that we have today. There is a significant scaling process that's going to have to happen, and it's so it will be sold at a premium initially, but I am excited, and I do believe that it will scale up effectively. Some people disagree. One of those people is actually the CEO of Impossible Foods, Pat Brown. So okay, yeah, of course he
Right.
has some bias. He has a plant-based and fermentation-derived product, but he gave the analogy, or what did he say? He said, making meat out of stem cells from a cow is like trying to grow the muscle cells of a horse instead of making a car. And so, yeah, he's basically saying, like, it's just so unnecessary. Just make the car if you need to drive. Basically, just make the plant-based burger or use fermentation because it's so much easier and more straightforward than
Hmm.
cultured meat. Yeah, take his opinion with a grain of salt, as you should everyone else's. But a lot, of course, people in the cultured meat field disagree with this. They say, this is how we're going to get, premium products. This is how we're going to get lab grown steaks, right? I mean, Impossible Foods doesn't have a lab grown, they don't have a steak product. They don't have a whole muscle cut,
Hmm.
or a chicken breast. They have all this ground stuff, ground beef and hamburger patties and chicken nuggets and things like that. Um, so it would be hard using plant-based and fermentation derived methods or ingredients to make a whole structured product. And also, some people are still really, they still are not convinced about Impossible or Beyond products. They say it does, I can tell the difference from a mile away. Like, it doesn't taste like meat at all. I don't know if I believe them. I'm like, really? Wow, your palate must be really tuned. But a lot of people say this, so you
Right.
have to hear them out. People like that, they want cultured meat, and they want the real taste of meat, the real taste and texture. So we do have to. Cultured meat is like a great solution to this, um, to having structured products, to having the right taste and texture. Also, nutritional benefits too. Gotta add that in there. Um, I am excited about cultured meat, even though, it doesn't really appeal to me personally. But I think the technology will be there very soon for it to be cost competitive.
Yeah, I think at least to me, like speaking as like a college student, like somebody that has to cook a lot of the time, and definitely like I am using my the work that I do at Hopkins to sort of fund whatever I eat throughout the week. Like definitely like cost does seem to affect like my purchasing decisions a lot of the times.
Mhm.
So I can definitely see how, especially if you're able to bring the price down for a lot of these things, especially on like the vegetable side, right? A lot of these like you were saying, like Impossible Burgers, or maybe all these other like alternatives to like regular patties or whatever like ground meat which somebody else like might potentially like buy in its place. I feel like for most people that would be like a bigger consideration than the actual taste, just because so many people are, especially like price conscious about the stuff that they buy. I think for most people, like the nutrition, they're not really thinking about it as much unless you're, doing a little bit more competitive. Maybe you're taking care of your health. Maybe, I don't know, you're a bodybuilder or an athlete that really requires specific like nutritional goals. Maybe, I don't know, you have to hit like 200 grams of protein like every day in order to hit your maximum goal of gaining muscle or recovery or whatever the case may be. I definitely do think that as the prices go down, more people will start to buy into the idea specifically of looking for other sources of protein. And honestly, this is something that I believe as well. Uh, like throughout history, at least like early history, like a lot of the protein that we think of today as being mainstream, so a lot of the beef, a lot of the chicken, a lot of those things were actually like pretty hard to come by. Like they weren't as available. Like it was definitely a premium to be able to have like a nice steak. And so back in the day, a lot of people would just go and resort to vegetables, and their diets were actually like much healthier. And it's a shift that we've seen throughout history just because of the availability of food that we have. And that just makes the choices of food that we eat just kind of a lot worse, just because now our taste buds, regardless of price, because everything is so low, really dictate how we eat. And, these comes with adverse effects to our health and just the way that we live our lives. So I personally do believe that like having a premium meat products, even though some people may disagree with this, I personally think that it is personally better, especially like me coming from Mexico, where sure, like meat is still a bit of a premium. And my mom would tell me this when she was little. Like my grandmother struggled a little bit, like whenever my mom was young, to buy food and stuff like that. And the cheaper alternatives and pretty much what was available for the price that she wanted to pay in Mexico were a lot of vegetables, were a lot of fruits, a lot of the stuff that nowadays we would sort of pay a premium for because they're healthy. And whenever they would have more money or more funds, they would go ahead and buy meat, right? So at the end of the day, that provided a inherently just better diet due to circumstances. And that's personally the way that I believe things should be a little bit. Even if others may disagree, I feel like that's a better turnaround because not only do we reduce the amount of potentially harmful things that we do to the earth just due to farming, but also the intake that we get from a lot of these like different foods.
You hit the nail on the head, Ricardo, and you made so many good points there. I'm just like completely agreeing with you. Yeah, I think the biggest thing is people, people more and more people don't see a meal as a meal unless it has meat in it, and they forget that meat is actually an incredibly expensive and inefficient process. We've had centuries to refine the process
Mm-hmm.
and make it as cheap as we possibly can using a lot of really cruel methods and environmentally unsanitary and unsafe methods. Um, but we've made it so cheap. And it's also subsidized by the government. So there's that too. So that's one of the reasons it's so cheap. So I get all the time like, oh, I could never be vegan. It's way too expensive. And I'm like, oh my gosh, like what are you trying to eat? Are you trying to eat Impossible burgers every single meal? Or even those are not that expensive anymore. Are you trying to eat like these fancy vegan cheeses every day? It's actually vegan food is actually, or plant-based food in general is actually pretty affordable.
Mm-hmm.
Meat, without those subsidies, it's not. It's not usually that affordable. So usually it is more rare to have. And therefore people who couldn't afford it were healthier and yeah, they didn't have all these heart problems that people who eat meals or people who eat a diet heavy in meat usually tend to have, like heart disease, cancer, things like that. And also evolutionarily, I'm not an expert in human evolution, but I know that we were hunter gatherers, and
Right.
when our bodies are not designed to handle so much meat. I'm not saying we're herbivores, but we are definitely omnivores, and but we can be herbivores if we want, because evolutionarily speaking, we did not used to come by animal meat that often as during our hunter-gatherer stage. It was, I mean, if you did, you'd have to run really fast, do all
Yeah.
this cardio to earn it. So that's just, one thing I always think about is for a reason why it is healthier to be, herbivore or, flexitarian, mostly eating or treating meat as like a celebratory thing or something that's rare. That's so much closer to our probably our natural human diet
Hmm.
that we evolved to handle. But yeah, it's also economically speaking, it just doesn't. It's not usually this easy to obtain so much meat and have it at every meal, like so many people do nowadays.
Yeah, no, it's definitely something that I've definitely like taken a look at, especially as somebody that like goes to the gym pretty often. Obviously, like I want to hit my goal of getting as much protein as possible, but I
Right.
obviously have to diversify it. I can't like I'll eat eggs, I'll eat like chicken and stuff like that, but I definitely need to diversify my protein intakes just because I can't see myself like for both lunch and dinner like eating chicken. Like I have to mix it up with vegetables in there because either way, like otherwise I'll feel really terrible. Like I just personally feel like, especially people that have digestive like issues, a lot of these things like processing meat within your body can also be pretty hard on your system as well. So like you said, we aren't necessarily designed to just all the time just be eating a lot of these big heavy protein sources, which most generally a lot of people think of as the only protein sources that we really have, which I personally also think is can be really detrimental, especially if you have a more like fragile system or a system that isn't really designed to appeal to that. And just as we have many differences with like allergies, some people are lactose intolerant versus people that are not. I feel like everybody's system is also different, and at the same time, you can't really tell everybody that like eating meat all the time is necessarily like, good for you. So I definitely see that aspect of things, and actually going into that, I guess as somebody that does want to get like a lot of protein in me, or bodybuilders and people that really generally do a lot of sports and do need to regain a lot of those the tears and the fibers of the muscles back using protein sources, what would you say is the most like beneficial or the most like protein heavy source that you know of besides like a lot of these meat alternatives that we have been using for a while?
Yeah, I gotta admit again, I want to emphasize I'm not a nutritionist
Right,
and
right.
by any means. I'm a biophysicist. I study proteins on the molecular level, not on the nutrition level, but as a long-term vegan and vegetarian, I can say like some of the best protein sources that I know of. And I also like to lift and rock climb and run and stuff too. So I do worry about my protein intake. So vital wheat gluten, it's not good if you're gluten intolerant, but
Mhm.
it's that protein part of wheat, and it actually makes a really stringy meat-like substance when cooked, and it has huge amount of protein. That and tempeh and tofu those are really, really protein dense. The amount of grams of protein per grams of the thing, it's pretty
Mhm.
comparable to like a chicken breast.
Oh,
So
okay.
I definitely recommend adding some tempeh, and it's also pretty cheap. Like I don't know, I shop at Safeway and Harris Teeter, Whole Foods, Trader Joe's. Tofu and tempeh are really, really inexpensive, and if you have an air fryer, definitely just throw them in the air fryer and they'll be so crispy and perfect. But if you don't have an air fryer, you can just throw them in the oven or fry them in oil if you so please. And
Right.
they're really good. And they people say like, oh, it tastes like nothing. I'm like, well, chicken also tastes like nothing until you season it.
Right, right.
So yeah, season it. You gotta add seasoning just like you would to a chicken. Season it with the same seasonings you use for chicken, and yeah, it's not. I wouldn't call it a meat substitute. It's not
Hmm.
really meaty. Some of these things, seitan, or that's the vital wheat gluten. That can be quite meaty, but tofu and tempeh, they're their own thing, their own category. Don't eat them expecting them to taste like meat because they're not meat, but they're really good. Any like despite not being meat, definitely give them a try. But yeah, I hope people get it as they get into some of these alternative meat products like Impossible burgers or Beyond Burgers, or there's like vegan eggs now, vegan egg scramble, just egg. I really like that. Vegan cheeses. I hope that people also try to explore some of these traditional protein sources that are plant-based too, because they're really, really good and they're really good for you.
Yeah, I'm so glad to hear that. And I think with that, I think we can end this conversation here. Thank you so much for being on the podcast. I really enjoyed having this conversation. Maybe later on, we can have another discussion, maybe in some time, as well, just to see how the alternative protein project is going, and sort of
Yeah.
see what the progress is. Maybe this podcast has been able to give you guys more of exposure on campus as well, because I didn't know of this. So hopefully the people that are listening to this are also able to go ahead and follow you on your Instagram and sort of connect with you as well, just so you get more members and you're able to, just get more awareness of all the different protein sources that we have. And like you said, not necessarily call them like alternative proteins, but the rightful proteins that they are, and implement them
Yeah.
in new and fun ways that, and one of the things that I try to think about is don't go in it with the idea of trying to make it taste like traditional like meat, right? Just go in with a
Right.
brand new understanding of this is a new food that I'm trying out. Think of it as like a brand new culture, right? You're trying food from somewhere else. Just appreciate the flavors that come with it, and hopefully that'll make the transition and just the adoption of that food a little easier into your everyday life.
Yeah, and if you don't mind, I can just drop our Instagram handle. It's at JHU Alt Protein. And you can check out our website by Googling Alt Protein Project at Johns Hopkins. We have a Slack workspace that I encourage everyone to join. That one you'll probably have to email us. We're JHU Alt Protein at gmail.com. Or you can reach out to me personally on LinkedIn or email lblake8 at jhu.edu. Really happy to chat with you and see how you can get involved. I'm actually no longer the president of the group. I am a advisor now. Emily Yao, she's the current president of the group. She's a materials science major. And so she would love to onboard you as either like a leader or a general member. We're definitely always looking to expand and have more involvement and more collaborations on campus like this.
Yeah, so thank you so much again for being here, for explaining all your great knowledge and all your experience that you've had with this great project and this great the progress that you've had as well. So thank you so much for coming in, and for all of you lovely viewers that have made it to the end, thank you so much for watching another episode, and I hope you catch us on our next one. And again, I'm Ricardo, and it was so nice to have an episode. Thank you.